Evolutionary.org, episode 595, 2024, Trenbolone All Esters Revisited. So we're going to talk about Trenbolone. We're talking about the history behind it. We're going to talk about the different esters. We're going to talk about different blends that underground labs are using with Tren that are very, very popular. We're talking all about Tren in this one. Both Mobster and I have experienced it. So a little background on Tren, first off. Injectable Tren acetate, first released for use in cattle industry in the 1980s under the name Finijet. And at the time, it contained a short-acting acetate ester. And at the time, the Trenbolone was used to beef up cattle right before slaughter. You had Tren Hex, and I'm going to pronounce the entire name, hexahydrobenzyl carbonate. And look, this was human grade Negma out of France. They produced it. Now, when the steroid, ban started hitting, pharmaceutical companies, they're like, you know what? We don't want to get involved in this. Okay, we don't want to get involved. We don't want our products to be used for bodybuilders. And this Tren Hex Parabolin that Negma was putting out was being purchased for bodybuilders, for bodybuilding specifically. So it's not a vet steroid historically. It's actually a bodybuilder steroid. It's one of the few steroids I would say out there that was never produced by an actual pharmaceutical company for medical reasons, but it was actually produced for bodybuilding itself. And once bodybuilders got a hold of this stuff, if they were lucky enough to get a hold of this stuff and know about it, they were able to transform his physiques. One of the reasons why you saw bodybuilding turn into freaks was because of Parabolin. If guys like Arnold and Frank Zane and Franco and all those guys in the 70s had access to Tren, it would have completely changed history when it came to bodybuilding. There would have been no golden age of bodybuilding. These guys would have been freaks. Can you imagine? I mean, Arnold would have been laughed off stage if he didn't use Tren. If he was using Primo and not using Tren, they would have laughed him off the stage back then. He would have been tiny. Frank Zane, they would have laughed him off the stage even worse. So it's completely changed bodybuilding. And it's one of the reasons why, Mobster, I think it changed bodybuilding. So very, very important steroid to talk about it. Go ahead.
Let me give you an example of the transformation that Steve just talked about. I've been privy to, because I actually saw this fellow in seminar, the Lou Ferrigno, Arnold's great rival in the 1975 film Pumping Iron, weighed 275 pounds in that movie. When Lou returned to the stage in the 90s, late 80s and 90s, Steve, he was 320 pounds. That's the transformation, because he would be Arnold stayed off. Arnold was doing movies. Arnold was a politician. Arnold the actor. Blah blah blah. But Louis came back to the stage, and that is a 45-pound difference. Now everybody else had moved on at the same time, and the 6'5", 320 was great for Lou Ferrigno, but everybody else had transformed their physiques as well. So there you go, Steve. That's just an example of a golden age bodybuilder competing with Arnold, coming back with new quote-unquote supplements, new PEDs, and access to different information that he hadn't had in the 70s when he'd previously competed. So that's just to give you an example. One of the things I was just saying off air in the pre-show and so on is Steve and I have touched upon the transformation of bodybuilding in the 90s, and that included, obviously, at the same time, growth hormone, insulin. Since then, of course, we could talk about peptides and SARMs. But you can see particular periods of bodybuilding historically, pre-50, 60, the 70s, and so on and so forth. And you ask yourself, what was it about bodybuilding that changed? Now, Tren was something that really caught the eye. We've touched upon, when we talked about Tren before, the fact that it was used to beef up, add muscle, add meat to the bone of cattle for before they went to market, and how many billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars that particular market is. The bigger the cow, the bigger the piece of beef, the more money you make. Simple as that. And bodybuilders get crazy excited about that. Tren by itself, and I'm just talking about literally, and this is in terms of me noticing that the product even existed, and especially when it comes to being on forums and talking to people, and I'm thinking specifically of forums in this example, Steve, it literally has fans. There's almost a slight tongue-in-cheek meme aspect of Tren in terms of you either like it or you don't. And the ones that like it really fucking like it. I think they almost like the fact that they kind of feel how they are when they're on. Tren All Esters again, Steve, and I'm thinking, I actually looked at this and I discovered two steroids that change in studies a measurable change in the psychological state of those people using it. One specifically for Tren was a bunch of 60-year-old men who are receiving small dose of Tren, one form or another, Steve, for medical reasons, and it had dementia-like effects on their brain. In other words, it literally changed how they thought, how they approached stuff. Now, in a younger athlete, someone that's trying to hit the gym, there are people that like how they feel. Steve's described Tren for him as being a relationship breaker-upper. Literally every relationship he had when he was on Tren kind of was fucking up just because of how he was with people and how he was with people around him. I've used Tren recently in a cut a few months ago, and I could feel and it was only low dose, Steve, the whole product thing that I took, which was a blend of steroids, including a small amount of Tren, made me feel kind of toxic. I could feel I had a sense of being on something that I hadn't been on before. But as I said, there's people there that absolutely love that. Let's talk about specifically the esters and what that means to athletes that might use it.
So very, very important to understand. Late 90s, when they discontinued Parabolin, human grade product eventually disappeared. All right. I mean, some people had stocked up on it ahead of time, and but eventually it's gone. I mean, you're not gonna be able to find it anymore today. So bodybuilders did what they needed to do to get a hold of the stuff. And they started to extract the Tren acetate from hormone from cattle pellets. They sold this under the brand called Phenaplix H. I can remember back on the forums, and I'll bring you in, Mobster, to explain more about this. I can remember back on the forums, guys would actually, always come on the forum and be like, where can I get these kits? Where can I get these pellets? I want to make this stuff. Or they would make it and they would sell it to people on the forums. So it was very, very well known and very, very popular to do it this way. Now, since then, I'm going to let Mobster explain more about that. But since then, luckily, we've had underground labs that have come out with good quality trends. So we're going to get into those esters shortly, but I'll let Mobster explain a little bit more about the pellet situation.
Yeah, so Muscle Media 2000 with Bill Phillips, and of course the magazine started before the year 2000, as well as Dan Duquesne, and other writers, started obviously to get incredibly excited about the whole Tren situation, as I described earlier. And as Steve said, there was proper conversations in the magazine, and around that time the forums kind of started, which would be the early to mid 90s. Like Steve says, where people are having a back and forth. How can I isolate the Tren part of the Phenoplex pellet? How do I dissolve in suspension? What's the best way to do it without getting any risk of infection? And there were specific kits, Tren kits, where you could take the Phenoplex. The problem was quite naturally that if you fucked it up, and for example, Steve, I mean, it stung because of the high alcohol content used to sort of keep it sterile. So you're taking this Tren, it's added muscle to you, but it helped like a bitch going in. So, what you really want, and I've actually got a book here on making steroids, but I don't know specifically, I don't think it includes Tren. You want a chemist who understands the whole testosterone molecule, how it's made, how you can isolate it, how you can change things about it, and so on and so forth. And ultimately, you need something that's close to pharmaceutical grade kits for breaking down pellets that are going in underneath the skin of a cow and sitting there for 3 months, I believe, Steve, and dissolving slowly away is really not the way to go. You even had topical applications kits where you'd get DMSO and you'd have people trying to make homemade versions of topical testosterone. That really isn't something that we should be doing in our fucking kitchens with a homemade kit taken from the guide off the internet. It's really not the way to go. So UGL's quite naturally works out with I'm an improper chemist, how they could produce Trenbolone in all the different esters, how you could make this sterile, and how obviously you can, and of course, they were only mimicking a product that had previously existed. That was the way to go. And then, of course, as we know, it is now, I would say, if 95% of the Olympians that we see in all divisions, and I'm including to a lesser degree the female classes, because we do know sometimes that females using it. I'd be very surprised if 95% of the athletes we see at the Olympian all classes aren't using Tren in some form, low dose, high dose, whatever. And the other thing I'll say as well, that there, and I said that I touched on this a little bit earlier on, there are literally, it's the closest steroid we have that has its own fan club, Steve. There are literally people that rave about this. I've seen signatures on forums, etc., saying Tren is gold, Tren is God. And why no one's produced a T-shirt, I don't know. But that's just how popular it is among some individuals. And I will say, because we talk about all kinds of steroids on this podcast, if you do well, if you like how you feel, and ignoring the side effects and ignoring the arguments about this one of two steroids that might change your kind of thought process, I suspect it's going to be one of those steroids you find, this works for me, my physique on this is transformed. I mean, we talked about the recomposition, we talked about the nutrient partitioning. It is literally going to be for you the basis probably of every single state that you do. And in fact, again, we've got our own pro on the forum, Steve, and he's a Tren fan right there. And you can see his physique. You can see what's happened to his physique over the last few years since he's been competing as a pro. So, you know, it's absolutely out there. And of course, I believe when we talked about the top 10 steroids, it was on the top 10 list as well. Back to you.
Yeah, so let's get into the esters a little bit. And look, you know, Underground Labs, they've done a beautiful job of producing, you know, Tren. I would say when they first started producing it, it was known as quote unquote dirty. And there's a lot of metabolites. I would say, like, if you took it and your bed sheets were white, and you sweat during the night, your bed sheets would turn brown. That's how much metabolites was in Tren. So very rustic color and all this stuff. So we've seen Underground Labs do a really good job over the years. If you come on our forums, and you'll see some good quality sources and some good quality labs that will provide you high quality Tren that is not going to have, you know, those types of, you know, issues, you know, when it comes to being so damn dirty in the system. But it is a very, very potent steroid. So look, at the end of the day, we can start with Tren No Ester. And we had someone, I saw it this morning, Mobster, talking about Tren No Ester. They wanted to add Tren No Ester to their pre-workout. And I've seen some people say, oh, this is the best thing ever, blah, blah, blah. But then those people, they don't talk about it anymore.
Let me touch on that, Steve. Yeah, sorry. So this is going to be one of those mobster rant kind of situations, guys. I really don't understand the mentality. I kind of do. I tell a lie, Steve. I kind of do. Everybody's looking for a fucking edge, right? And Tren is kind of a drug when it comes to bodybuilding. It's right up there in terms of giving you edge. The idea that I would take Tren Hex or Tren No Ester, for example, Tren No Ester specifically in this example, as a pre-workout, over and above everything else that guys use, and you and I talk about stims and stuff. And look, right, here's the issue for me. The great and vast majority of people, I'll keep this short and simple, go to the gym in the afternoon, early evening. Okay, I train in the morning. There's a few of our members that train in the morning. The majority train in the late afternoon, early evening. You are taking something on top of the pre-workouts you're almost certainly using. And I like coffee, but it's coffee in the morning, Steve, not coffee at the fucking night time. You are taking something else that's kind of winding your physique up, kind of making you, because that's what they're looking for. They want a crazy motherfucker, berserker fury, tearing the gym up kind of situation. And we already know that there are side effects, which includes its ability to fuck up your sleep, quote unquote, insomnia, how you're going to sweat in bed, and so on and so forth. And we're going to get into side effects as well. I kind of would warn against the idea outside of a powerlifting or strength competition, just for working out, of using anything, including Trenbolone Ester, just to get a good workout. And what I quite often do when these kind of conversations take place is I say the following: post me a picture of the physique that you've developed, making yourself some kind of crazy nut fuck that needs to go to the gym, rampaging around like a lunatic. And 9 times out of 10, Steve, I'm not seeing a photograph. So, guys, I get the idea of wanting, myself included, to tear shit up when I hit the gym, but I would warn against the idea of doing something that kind of makes you think and feel, etc., that particular way, especially if you're going to train in the late afternoon, early evening. Because, Steve, the stims that people are using, the pre-workouts of stims that people are using, the idea of using Trenbolone Ester on top of stims, because it won't be without, it's almost certainly with, and then not being able to get to sleep and then needing more drugs to calm your ass down just to get a night's sleep, is, to me, is like, it's mind-blowing. I don't understand. And especially if you're not showing something for fucking yourself up. So yeah, that's a mobster rant right there.
Yeah, and here's the thing: the trend's going to be in your system either way. If you're using Tren Ace, Tren E, Tren Hex, a Tren Blend, it's going to be in your system when you
Yeah.
go work out. So taking it pre-workout is not going to give you an advantage necessarily. It may give a peak, but it's not going to really give an advantage over time. But here's where the advantage comes in, Mobster.
Yeah.
Is that Tren no ester is not going to be detectable. So if you're a tested athlete,
Yes. Yes.
if I'm playing
Fighter.
linebacker,
Yeah. Fighter, MMA,
football,
boxer even. Yeah.
I mean, you can take this stuff and it's not going to be in your system. So it's a really, really good idea to use something like Tren no ester in that situation. But keep in mind, it's going to be very inflammatory and it's going to cause a lot of side effects. So if you're an MMA guy, it's going to boost your strength, it's going to boost your aggression, it's going to boost your androgenic effects, but it's going to come at a cost. And a lot of times, it's going to cost you, because if that match goes on a while, if you're a boxer, MMA guy, and the match goes on a while,
Yeah.
I don't really follow that shit, but like I could see you definitely wearing out. We've seen boxers basically have strategies in a heavyweight boxing match that's 12 rounds. Their strategy is to just wear you out. They're not even
Yes.
trying the first few rounds. That's the
Yeah.
strategy, because they
Yeah.
know that their endurance is going to kick your ass. So it's the same thing here. But if you're a test athlete, because it's not going to be detectable, so it's going to be something that you would take before your game or before your training, and in case they do call you in to be tested, hey, you know what? Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock, you've got to show up at the lab for your steroid test. Okay, well, now you know, and you just stop taking it. And by the time Tuesday rolls around, it's not going to be in your system. But if you're taking Tren Ace or Tren E, it's going to be detectable. It's going to show up. So that would be the advantage of taking Tren no ester. You want to touch on that, Mobster, and we'll move on to the
Yeah,
next?
very quickly. So there was a suggestion, and it wouldn't necessarily be a Trenbolone Ester or even a shorter version of Tren, but there was, and you've actually just said something about it, Steve. The idea was that certain boxers, including a very, very well-known boxer whose surname begins with T, may or may not have used certain steroids to increase his aggression. And of course, the reality of that situation was that if he didn't destroy the fuck out of you in the first 3 rounds, he was fucked. And he destroyed a great many people in the first 3 rounds. In fact, indeed, quite often in the first round. But when the match went off for 4 or 5 rounds, he got his ass handed to him, and it didn't work. So there's a suggestion, not just for him, but for boxers of a similar ilk. There's something else which I will call an advantage. And I did say specifically for competition, but I'll also call this as an advantage. Any of the shorter esters, and this is why we recommend the shorter esters in this example. If you've never used any steroid or a specific steroid, and in this case, Tren, then we tend to suggest that you use the shorter ester. So, for example, Tren no ester Ace first, because it's in your system quick and it's out your system. So if you don't fucking like how you feel, Steve, if you think, oh my God, this feels horrendous, I feel toxic as shit, my cardio's gone to shit, and so on and so forth, then a shorter ester makes more sense just feel it so it's in your system. You feel like dog shit for a brief period of time, and then it's out of your system. If you get on with it, if you cope with it, then you go, okay, so maybe I should try a Tren Enanthate or Tren Prop, purely and simply because something like that will last longer in your system, requires less pinning, and you already know that you can cope with a steroid. And that applies to all steroids, but especially to those that might have this kind of toxic, I don't like how I feel when I'm on kind of situation. And again, that might also be the case if, for example, you're trying a higher dosage. And again, I'm thinking of Tren than you had previously. 300 milligrams, I feel great. 500 milligrams, oh my God, I hate how I feel. So that's a little bit of advice in that particular regards. I'm not keen on the idea of trying steroids just because. So obviously you go, I want a recomposition. I like the results that I hear that Tren might give me, but I've never used Tren before. Try something with a shorter ester versus a longer ester. Back to you.
The next shorter one is Tren acetate. And Tren acetate has a half-life, of about 3 days. So that doesn't mean you inject it 3 days later it's out of your system. That means that half of it will be in your system after 3 days, and in another 3 days, half of what you originally injected will be in your system. And then after 9 days, half of that will be in your system, and so on. That's what it means. So really, I always say you take the half-life, you multiply it by 5 to get an idea of how long it takes if you're injecting on a proper schedule, of course, and you're injecting the same amounts for it to reach peak in your system. So with Tren Ace, if it has a 3-day half-life, it will take about 15 days to reach peak in your system if you're injecting it on a proper schedule. And in this case, Tren Ace, usually people inject it every other day. Some people will go every day. Some people will go every 3 days. It's fine. I've done Tren Ace before, and I've done it every 3 days. You're not going to die going every 3 days. People don't understand what half-life means. They think that half-life means after 3 days, oh, it's out of your system. So it's very important to explain this to people. So as you're taking it, it's building up, building up, building up. And if let's say you do take it every 3 days, like I was suggesting. So after 5 injections, you'd be at day 15. Okay. And you just did your 5th injection, right? So that's when it's peaking in your system and then it levels off. Now, when you stop taking it, the opposite happens. It trickles out of your system and it would take 15 days to trickle out of your system. It doesn't just trickle out of your system all at once the next day after your last injection or after 3 days. No, it's still in your system. So if you're taking Tren Ace, that gives you a little bit of an advantage, a big advantage actually, when it comes to, oh my God, my side effects are getting out of control. I need to come off of this stuff. So you come off 15 days later, it's going to be out of your system. Now, when you're using the next one we talk about, which is Tren E, the enanthate ester is going to be in your system longer, about 8-9 days. I've seen 10 days, I've seen 11 days. So, it's going to be longer. So really, let's say 10 days is the average I've seen, when it comes to E. So that means it takes 50 days to reach peak in your system. It's not really an issue. In my experience, Tren E and Tren Ace hits you like a ton of bricks either way. You see? So really, to me, it doesn't matter if you're using Tren Ace or Tren E. They both hit you like a ton of bricks by like week 2 when you're on them, right? But the thing is that there is a difference when you stop taking it. So when you stop taking Tren E, it's going to take 50 days to be out of your system. This is why it's important, I feel like, for your first couple cycles using Tren, just to see how you like it and how you react to it, to use the Tren Ace in case the side effects get too brutal. And I'm going to tell you the side effects in a little bit, but we're going through the esters right now. But in case that the side effects get too bad, at least with the Ace, you can stop taking it in a week and a half. It's going to be out of your system. With the Tren E, it's going to take about 50 days. So that is definitely an issue. And then you have Tren Hex, which is kind of in between. Tren Hex is like 4.5 days, 5 days. So it's kind of like in between the Ace and the E. Really, I don't see any difference between taking Tren Hex and just taking, Tren E. I mean, I've used all the above. And then you've got Tren, which is a combo. It's Ace, Hex, and E all in one. So in that situation, if you wanted to do the Tren, you could just go ahead. It'd be like taking Sustanon. It's like each ester picks up after another. So really, you want to kind of treat it like a longer ester. So you want to pin it like twice a week in that situation. Again, each ester is picking up after another. A lot of people have that misconception with Sustanon too, Mobster, is they think, oh my God, it has a short ester. So I should, treat it like a short. No, no, no. It has long esters too, you dumbass. So
Yeah,
you're just going to ignore the long esters and just worry about the
yeah,
short
exactly.
esters? That's not the
Yeah,
way it works. Again, it's each esters picking up at one after another. So that's not correct. That's not correct what people are saying in situations. So you still treat it like it would be like a Tren in that situation. So there's different esters. So why would someone use Tren before I bring you in, Mobster?
yeah,
My experience with Tren, again, I don't see a difference. It's just something different that underground labs have come up with, but I don't see a difference. Tren Ace, Tren E, Tren Hex, same thing to me. They all hit you like a ton of bricks. They all have the same side effects, which we're going to get into shortly.
yeah.
It's all Tren. And the only difference I would say is, do I want the flexibility of being able to stop this stuff and being out of my system quicker? That's really the only difference to me. And also length of cycle. If you're going to stick to like 5 or 6 weeks on Tren, then go with the Tren Ace. This way it's peaking after a week and a half. But if you want to go a little longer with Tren, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, I mean, I can't imagine 12 weeks. But if you did want to go
No,
12 weeks,
no,
then
no.
you'd use the E. But I mean, it would be very, very rough to do that. So
Here's the situation, Steve, and this is the reason sometimes when we discuss any steroid, and especially if we was having a round table type discussion, either on the forums with a bunch of buddies or whatever else, right? Let me give you this analogy. So, for example, there's a little difference, as Steve said, between one ester and another ester. Why would you pick one over another? And I'll give you an example right here, Steve. I would actually suggest that number one is enanthate and number two is ACE. And then you go, right, so why do we see differences of opinion? Well, number one, the person you're talking to is not necessarily aiming to get the same out of their cycle as you are. I train with one buddy that's 77. I train with another buddy the same time when we bench press who's half my body weight. So there's no point in me having a conversation about what I'm using for weighing 140 kilos, 150 kilos versus talking to someone else that weighs 70 kilograms. Something else that we see, and this happens a lot on the forums and in these kind of conversations, is literally the condition, how you respond and the level of side effects and positive and negative responses to a steroid comes from if someone's fatter than you are, they're probably going to have more side effects. They're probably going to struggle more. And then, as I said, and it's literally individual response as well. So you might have someone as an absolute fan of prop, and then I would say, yeah, but the majority use enanthate and the ACE versions of Tren. So it's that kind of weird situation where one person's particular response to a steroid, their condition, and the aim of the cycle can be completely different to yours. So you're better off asking sometimes the chemical questions and the science questions, and you put those over the person asked, replying to you, and making sure that they're coming from the same sort of way that you are. Let me give you an example. I'm going to touch a little bit on the side effects here. I've had strongman buddies that were competing at a high level, 105 and up, and one particular athlete was up to and included the world's strongest man level, top 10 indeed at one point, where they tried Tren. And you have to remember with strength athletes, now they've got leaner in the last 10 years or so. You are seeing abs on even the guys at 160, 170 kilograms body weight. Prior to that, we tended to carry a little bit more body fat. And this is 80s, 90s, and 2000 strength athletes. Those guys weighing 150, 160 kilograms with 10%, 15%, 20% body fat using Tren are going to be sweating their asses off, Steve. And I'm thinking particularly again of the world's strongest man level athlete, talking about sweating buckets, having to get up at the middle of the night, waking up, changing the sheets, going back to bed. Their clothes were sticking to them. They were radiating heat to the point where the girlfriend / partner was struggling with them in bed. What the fuck, and so on and so forth. And this was all known about. It wasn't no great secret or whatever else, but it was just that experience that they had. Now, someone is going to be super lean conditioned with a really good cardio when they went into it is probably not going to have quite the same level of side effects and struggle with it. And again, that's an important point to make when we have these sort of roundtable type discussions with other athletes, with other bodybuilders, with members of the forum. It's the same example you wouldn't talk to someone that runs a marathon about sprinting. You don't want to talk to an Olympic lifter about MMA and so on and so forth. Make sure that when you're getting advice, it's more generalized for, as we do on these podcasts, Steve, for the majority of listeners, rather than necessarily why someone says, "Oh, Hex is my favorite, props my favorite." Ask them why, and so on and so forth. So there's a bit of advice for you there too.
So let's talk about dosing. So Tren, 150 milligrams would be the absolute minimum. And then I'd work my way up. The average dose has always been like 300, 350. I've used up to 400. I can tell you that the difference between 300 and 400 is huge. Huge when it comes to side effects, and actually counterproductive in my mind, because now you're getting more side effects where it's affecting your cycle. Now, pros, it's chemical warfare. We all know that. Guys on the forum, the Body Monster, the Monstro, those guys who are pros, who are absolute freaks, they'll run Tren 500, 600, up to 1,000. Okay. It's chemical warfare. You're trying to outgun one of the guys on the forum. He's in and out of prison. He's got to defend himself in prison. He's got to you got to basically just protect yourself, when you're in prison. So you got to do what you got to do. Or if you're on a bodybuilder who's on stage, Mobster, you got to beat the guy next to you. If he's doing 1,200 Tren, you got to do 1,500. It's chemical warfare where guys are overdoing each other. But 99.9% of you don't fall in that category. So for those of you, look, just stick to 250 would be a perfect dose. 300 maybe if you want to push it. No need to go more than that, especially if you're stacking. How many people do we hear, Mobster, who complain about Tren side effects, and you say, "Oh yeah, I'm on all this tests with it. I'm on all this other steroids with it."
Yeah.
Well, the more you stack with it, the more side effects you're going to get. And if you stack an androgen with it, of course, you're going to get more side effects. So touch on that a little bit, and then we'll start getting into the side effects.
Right. So very quickly, when it comes to competition, competing bodybuilders, there's two things to be aware of. The high level competing bodybuilder, the quote unquote freaks, those that have made it to the Arnold, the Olympia, and other high level competitions, part of what makes them a freak is their genetic response to steroids. The genetic response to nutrition, the genetic response to training. It has been said of some athletes that they could look at a barbell and grow. These are the guys that were muscular before they started, that they tended to have athletic ability before they went to the gym. The number of stories where they were doing something at football or soccer or whatever else with abs, and then hit the gym, and then decided bodybuilding was a thing. And then, as I say, specifically, the genetic response in this example to steroids. The second part, which we touched upon on another show, is competition stacks. Now, Steve's quite correct, and the phrase chemical warfare is incredibly apt. In fact, I think it's even in the name of a book about steroids, Steve. And so here's the thing. Competition stacks tend to be as long as 20 weeks, and certainly competition prep, 20 odd weeks. I've heard of even longer than that. Competition stacks can easily be 16 weeks, and they tend to be multi-phased. Shorter esters are used specifically, again, towards the end, because you're looking to manipulate the body to peak it sometimes, and I touched upon this in a recent show, for a matter of hours on a particular day. And that basically is when that bodybuilder is on stage. That's in terms of walking manipulation, everything else. Competing bodybuilding is not healthy. There are open and honest, if they are anonymous, competing pros that will tell you they feel like shit on the day of a competition. You're not meant, but the getting super lean, super ripped, super dry, shredded, etc., is not a natural state for a human being.
So let's get into those side effects specifically, because we're almost out of time. So really, the big side effects that you're going to deal with is the inflammation. Tren, it basically is extremely inflammatory in the body, and that puts a lot of strain on all your organs. So your liver, your kidneys, your heart, all your organs, your brain even, are going to be under attack when you're on Tren. So very common to feel fatigued on it. Very common. The weird thing is you're fatigued, but also you got trensomnia. You're not able to sleep well. So it's like a combo of those things. If you're already a big guy, you already have sleep apnea, and you go on Tren, don't expect to sleep very much on Tren. It's going to make it worse. So not a good idea if you've got existing sleep issues to use Tren. Dehydration just seems like you can never hydrate enough on Tren. You need to load up on the fluids. You got to have good quality spring water. You got to know how to play around with your electrolytes. You got to get in your taurine with Tren. The crippling pumps, there's nothing like the Tren pumps. You're dealing with extreme, effects on your.
Talk about your mood, Steve. How you? I
Yeah, and
mean, I
then
touched it earlier.
yeah. So I mean, that's the way it affects your brain, the way it affects your neurotransmitters, your refractory period, dopamine in your brain, all this stuff. So it really has an effect on things like you would not believe. So I recommend try it, be flexible with it, and go with Trenace as a first cycle. That's what I recommend. So Mobster, finish up. Final thoughts. Take us to disclaimer.
Tren absolutely has its place, and I suspect we'll never see it come out of bodybuilding unless something even more crazy comes along or is rediscovered of the 100 or so steroids that absolutely exist out there. It's not for everybody. When we talk about the side effects, we quite often just touch upon those in other shows, but with Tren, the side effects can be very real and can be discomforting for some users. As I said earlier on, others love it. The sensation of being on and the effect it's having and its recomposition and effects on nutrient partitioning make it just wonderful. Myself even having a sort of a recomposition effect when I was doing my cut. So, gaining back muscle, but keeping the waist size down. So I can't deny that it was effective. I just didn't like how I felt on it. You need to be aware of the side effects of steroids, and you especially need to be aware of those when it comes to Tren. So your fair warning, but for those of you that do love it, you absolutely love it. And its place in modern bodybuilding is without discussion. Please note, we are not these doctors and opinions are ours. It's our view. It is based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcast for informational purposes, entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.